The Chinese Communist Party has a propaganda field day. Chinese billionaire Jack Ma goes missing. Plus, mass arrests in Hong Kong. That and more on this week's China News headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Before I begin, did you know YouTube has been randomly unsubscribing people and demonetizing a lot of our videos? You can help the show by hitting that like button and sharing this episode. If you're not seeing notifications for our episodes, we publish new ones every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and sometimes Saturday, so check back often. So, this week in China news, America news. No matter where you sit on the U.S. political spectrum, we can all agree that the real winner of what happened at the U.S. Capitol this week was the Chinese Communist Party. You see, for a long time, one of the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda messages has been about how chaotic and terrible Western democracy is. And now, Chinese media are having a field day. My favorite state-run media, the Global Times, called it America's Waterloo. Words like karma, retribution, and deserving were frequently mentioned in Chinese netizens' comments. Yes, these are just online comments that the Global Times just happened to notice because they happen to not get censored, so they happen to include them in their article. The article also says that Chinese observers, who are not named here but are definitely not the Global Times editorial staff, say the U.S. has totally lost legitimacy and qualification to interfere in other countries' domestic affairs. Gee, that's too bad. Because up until this week, the CCP had welcomed the U.S. interfering in their domestic affairs. Another state-run media article compares this week's U.S. protest to the 2019 protests in Hong Kong and reminds Chinese people of just how restrained Hong Kong police were. Yes, when Hong Kong police fired tear gas directly at journalists, including me, while I was walking on a public street, I also felt they were very restrained. And this editorial says the Capitol mob represents an internal collapse of the U.S. political system. The problem, you see, is the result of society's severe division and the U.S. government's failure to control such division. If only the American government would use a strong hand to crush dissent. Yes, that's the way to do it. Speaking of crushing dissent, one of China's richest men, Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba, is missing. What's that, Shelley? Oh, he's not missing. He's just lying low. He's probably just really busy with a new hobby, like learning how to bake a perfect loaf of sourdough bread. I mean, sure, he hasn't been seen in public since October. That's when Jack Ma gave a speech at the Bund Summit in Shanghai, where he criticized China's financial regulators. He said they stifle innovation. Apparently, communism and innovation don't go together. And sure, there's a long history of Chinese tycoons disappearing when the Communist Party decides they've gotten too big, but surely that didn't happen to Jack Ma. Chinese regulators simply decided to halt the blockbuster IPO of Ma's company, Ant Group. And then the central bank summoned him for questioning. And then regulators ordered the restructuring of the company he founded. And then launched an antitrust investigation into Ma's biggest company, Alibaba. But it's not like the Chinese Communist Party is using Ma to send some kind of message. No, they're using someone else to send a message to Ma. Lai Xiaomin, one of China's top bankers, has been given a death sentence for taking bribes. So I wouldn't be too surprised if soon Jack Ma does reappear, with a new attitude that's very grateful to the CCP and its regulators. Speaking of total submission, it's time for my unfortunate catchphrase. Hong Kong police have arrested more democracy activists. Like, a lot more.
Until now, we have arrested 53 people in total, including 45 males and 8 females, aged 23 to 64. They are suspected of being involved in the crime of subverting state power. 6 people were acting in the role of organizing and planning, while the other 47 were participating.
Good old vague subverting state power, just like the mass arrests in mainland China. More than 1,000 police were involved in the raid that captured an American lawyer as well. Yeah, you heard me right. An American citizen has been arrested in Hong Kong. Clearly, he's a serious danger to society. This is John Clancy, chairman of the Asian Human Rights Commission. So what horrible crime was committed? Well, back in July, the Hong Kong Democratic Party tried to hold a primary election, and he was involved.
The Democratic Party said police arrested the activists for participating in an independently organised, unofficial primary in July to select candidates for last September's legislative election. In the end, that vote was postponed for a year due to public health restrictions. The pro-democracy movement had hoped to win a majority, and some candidates wished to use it to block government proposals, which the Democratic Party says was seen as an act of subversion in violation of the national security law. Local media said Wednesday's police operation included searches of the offices of the Hong Kong Public Opinion Research Institute and lawyers who helped organise the primaries. The Hong Kong government and Beijing warned that the unofficial primaries could violate the national security law. Under the law, anything Beijing broadly defines as secession, subversion, terrorism and collusion with foreign forces is punishable by up to life in prison.
John Clancy's crime? He was the treasurer of a political group involved in those unofficial primaries. So to sum up, the Hong Kong police just arrested 53 people for organizing a primary election because it was designed to help the pro-democracy groups win a majority of seats in the legislature, which then they could use to get the government to listen to them. That's it. That's the crime. Because of how the system is designed, the pro-democracy camps had never gotten a majority before. And now, thanks to the national security law, they never will. Also, the existing pro-democracy legislators have all either been kicked out or resigned. And a lot of those lawmakers were in the group of 53 people who were just arrested. So things are going really well in Hong Kong for the Chinese Communist Party, especially since the Hong Kong authorities carried out the mass arrests on January 6th. I wonder if they were banking on the US government being a little distracted on that day. Boy, that really worked out for them. Speaking of the Chinese Communist Party being able to get away with anything, stay tuned after the break. I'll show you how they're getting away with covering up the coronavirus. Welcome back. After a year, the World Health Organization is finally trying to get a team into Wuhan to study the origin of the coronavirus. And China's not letting it happen. Almost as if they've got something to hide. But if you've seen this wonderful propaganda piece in the New York Times, you know that China has the real freedom. Did you know the pandemic has upended many predictions, including ideas about freedom? Citizens of China don't have freedom of speech, freedom of worship, or freedom from fear, but they have the freedom to move around and lead a normal day-to-day life. In a pandemic year, many of the world's people would envy this most basic form of freedom, which is why it's so sad to see a free country like China emulating the United States. Look at what happened when this woman tried to leave a coronavirus quarantine zone in Shenyang this week. Of course, despite all the wonderful words from the New York Times about the openness of China, they just locked down a city of 11 million people. And in the city of Dalian, residents are running out of food. We are like lambs to the slaughter. There's no way to save ourselves. We don't know how long we will be locked inside. Well, if they're like lambs to the slaughter, there'll be plenty of food. But we do have some good news. The New York Stock Exchange will delist 3 big Chinese telecoms. That was after they said they wouldn't do that, which was after they first said they would do that. Those companies were delisted to comply with this executive order from President Trump. It's aimed at protecting American investors from putting their money into companies tied to the Chinese military. This week, Trump also banned several Chinese software apps, like Alipay, citing potential espionage risks. For more on Trump news that happened this week, check out my other channel, America Uncovered. And considering everything happening in the US right now, I'm glad you're watching China Uncensored. It's important for people to know what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. But YouTube has been soft censoring China Uncensored by demonetizing our videos, secretly unsubscribing people, and not notifying people when we release new videos. So join what I call the China Uncensored 50-cent army. They're viewers like you who contribute as little as $1 an episode on the crowdfunding website Patreon. That's patreon.com/China Uncensored. As a thank you to them, I answer their questions on the show. And today's question comes from 50-cent army member Richard Combs. He says, I see America Uncovered and China Uncensored on Patreon. I get notifications on my email, not YouTube. You know, Richard, that is actually one of the often overlooked perks of supporting the show on Patreon. YouTube does not send out notifications about new episodes for everyone who's subscribed. Often, even if you have the notification bell turned on. Even worse, people have been secretly unsubscribed by YouTube. But I post every episode on Patreon, and Patreon notifies everyone who supports China Uncensored on Patreon. So it's another way to be sure you're getting notified when I make new episodes. If you're interested in supporting China Uncensored on Patreon, go to patreon.com/China Uncensored to learn more. Thanks again for watching. I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.